All right, giving a little visual aid to this podcast. Nothing much, just the good old PowerPoint. But this is about pirates, and it's particularly about the golden age of pirates, which is in the 1700s. It really only lasted from about 1715 to 1721, about 6 years there, where it was, really some high speed hours before the English Empire brought the hammer down. But what you have is a lot of misinformation out there. For example, Blackbeard, the most famous pirate of all by far, his flag is usually represented as what's on the left here, with a horned devil stabbing a heart with a spear, and he's holding a half-hour glass to signal time is up. That's completely made up, and it comes from a 1920s novel. It's all fiction. Blackbeard's victims describe his flag as just being a black flag, so they did get that part right, with a death head in the middle, which is a skull, and that's it. So it makes you wonder, what else have we been told about Blackbeard or these other pirates that's a lie? It also makes you wonder, why is it that no matter where in the world you go, if you ask people to name a pirate, they'll say Blackbeard, and if you ask them to name another pirate, they usually can't, or they'll say a fiction one like Jack Sparrow or Captain Hook or whatever. Why is it that Blackbeard is remembered the world round, from here to Africa to Norway? Everybody's heard of Blackbeard, and none of the other pirates are remembered at all. Why is that? And we'll go and answer that question today. So in the Caribbean in the early 1700s, it was mostly ruled by the Spanish, but Jamaica and the Caymans, Bahamas, and a handful of islands were under English rule. And of course, the French had half of Haiti. They also had New Orleans, which isn't on this map, but it should be, and some of the Saint Kitts and some of the islands there in the furthest east were French. So it's a huge mess when the War of Spanish Succession breaks out, and then Queen Anne's War, which kind of overlap. And you've also got Portugal and Denmark and some other countries mixed in there, and they're all fighting. And all of these nations were very dependent, particularly the Spanish, the English, and the French, on these colonies. That's where their wealth was coming from. Spain was getting all of that gold that they stole from the Aztec, all the silver that they stole from the Inca and out of Bolivia, and so you've got a lot of gold and silver transversing the Atlantic Ocean, and as well as tobacco and cotton and coffee and sugar, and all of those items were making these nations rich, and they needed that trade and that wealth of their new world colonies to sustain their power in Europe. And so they all robbed each other on the high seas. It was very difficult with wooden ships to sack these fortified islands. These islands all became fortified. Nassau in the Bahamas, Port Royal, Jamaica, Havana, Cuba was an absolute fortress. So it was hard to go on the offense. When you got a stone fortress full of cannons versus wooden ships, even if the ships hit the fort with as many cannonballs as they receive, they're still going to lose, because it only takes one below the waterline and the ship's sinking. Whereas you could pummel the fort, and it's never going to. I mean, it would take far more than that. You get it, and the ships are going to lose. So the strategy that all of these nations employ is they just rob each other in the high seas, and nobody really tries to sack these forts. Sometimes they did, but it was a lot of casualties to do so, and so they really didn't try. It was just a lot of blockading and trying to surround islands and starve them out and sit offshore and things like that. But when the war ends, these forts are still there, and the pirates kind of take over them, including the one in Nassau in the Bahamas. And it makes it to where when they rebel in Nassau against England, England can't just march in and whip them and put things back in order. So it's difficult. They got to kind of catch these pirates in the act and catch them on the high seas, and they're having a really hard time doing it, which is why they eventually settle on the pardon instead of trying to hang everybody. You think about that, they went from trying to kill everyone to forgiving everybody. And the reason why is it scared the tar out of England that these guys were, basically implementing democratic government. They voted for their leaders. They could vote them out. Everything was shared more equally. They had workers' compensation. There's all kinds of things way, way, way ahead of their time. And that scared the crown more than anything, a lot more than losing a little bit of loot. So the main guys responsible are former privateers Benjamin Hornigold and Henry Jennings, and their proteges Blackbeard and Charles Vane. Edward Thatch is the name used for Blackbeard in most of the documents. He is referred to as Edward Teach twice, once in a Boston newspaper and once during the trial of Stead Bonnet, who was another pirate that sailed with Blackbeard on one of his voyages, his most epic one, which was the third one. The other two he sailed with Hornigold. We'll talk about all those later. But what really kicks it off is the wreck of a Spanish treasure fleet in 1715. This is going to spark a chain of events that leads to the independence of Nassau, however brief it was, and the Pirate Republic. Even though our story starts with a Spaniard named Vasquez, who was the admiral that was supposed to sail this treasure fleet back to Spain, and he refused to do it because it was during the tempest or hurricane season, basically. And when he refused to go and said that he was going to take it up with the courts, colonial intelligence stabbed him, but he didn't die. He made his way to a tavern in Port Royal to see a hooker one last time. He was dying from this wound. He'd been stitched up, but he knew he was going to die. We didn't have the best medical services in 1715, but he sat down in his tavern next to an English merchant captain, and he told the story of what had happened to him. And colonial intelligence, this guy named Sabel, was responsible for one ship in particular, which was the Urca de Lima, as the largest Spanish treasure galleon ever built. And along with 11 other Spanish ships, it was supposed to sail from Havana to Spain. The King of Spain did not want all that gold sitting on the docks in Havana. He wanted it to sail for Spain immediately, even though it was hurricane season. And Vasquez was right, because a hurricane sunk the entire fleet, including the Urca de Lima. Now, they left Havana, Cuba to go to Spain, but they actually followed the Gulf Stream, which travels north up Florida all the way to Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, and then kind of hooks east, and then you can take it to Europe. But they never made it past a little bit north of Fort Pierce, kind of southern middle Florida, kind of near Cape Canaveral would be the north end of the wrecks. People today are still finding gold coins from these wrecks. They're scattered everywhere, and they're spread around by countless hurricanes between then and now. But the Spanish were able to salvage a lot of it initially and were guarding it on the beach. And then they sent word to explain what had happened to them. And Vasquez didn't know the location of the wrecks. But when he tells this story to the English merchant captain, his English merchant captain was Henry Jennings, a former privateer. And Jennings gets permission from Archibald Hamilton, the governor of Jamaica, to go and search for these wrecks. And the governor is going to fit him out with men and good ships and gunpowder and all that, but he wants a cut if they are successful. And Jennings takes Charles Vane with him, who's like total, the best person that you have. He has absolutely no fear of anything, and he's got a tremendous crew of, they're all baymen from the Caribbean, like born and raised, so they know how to sail. And even though Vane was born like really poor in the streets of London, but he's been in the Caribbean his whole life, and he's hard as nails. So he's along for the ride, and they actually capture a correspondence ship. It was basically a Spanish ship that was full of mail going back to Spain, and that has the coordinates of the wrecks, because the Spanish were going to send everything they had to go guard the wrecks. And when they get the mail and they figure out where it is, they immediately go there. Now, the Spanish have built a little fort on the beach very hastily. There's about 60 people guarding it. The English have got Charles Vane and 300 men. So they crush the Spanish and they steal the gold that was on the beach. The was 87,000 pieces, coins. And then on the way home, they took 2 more ships from Spain, just because they could. And when they get back to Jamaica, Spain is putting, they knew who did it. They put a lot of pressure on Hamilton to turn these guys over. And if he didn't, then they said that he should hang them, himself. And Hamilton goes to Vane and Jennings and says, "You can't stay here anymore, or I'm going to have to arrest you and hang you. If I don't, it could open up another war with Spain, and they're going to come for me." So they're like, "All right, well, F you," and they leave, and they go to the Bahamas, and they take their money with them. Now, when they get there, they're going to help start this pirate utopia with some of that wealth, and they take over the fort, and they link up with Blackbeard and Hornigold, and this is where it all kind of begins. Now, Blackbeard, that we'll get into that story in the next podcast, but he is going to sail with Hornigold in the beginning. And Hornigold, like Jennings, had been a very successful privateer, and they're going to have 2 epic journeys together before they split. And then Blackbeard will go on his most famous voyage, which is the 3rd one. And that's the one most people have heard about. And it's such a ridiculous story. It's insane that no one knows it. I don't know why such cool, real history has been replaced with nonsense, but that's the world we live in. And you'll have to hear that story next time.